Hello, everybody. Thanks for coming. This is a panel discussion about climate neutral. I hope some of you guys might be able to fill in this middle part a little bit so you're out of the aisle. But we'll be having a sort of moderated conversation here for the next 45 minutes or so, and then we'll open up to questions from the audience, so if anyone's interested. But seriously, you guys on the fringe should come in and sit or like come hunker down because you're going to be chatting for a while. So, those that don't know, my name is Alex Honnold. I'm a professional climber. I agreed to come and moderate today, so I'm just asking questions, just chatting, having a nice time. Though my interest in carbon offsets and carbon neutrality in general stems back a ways. I started my own foundation quite a while ago, basically because I was sort of investigating carbon offsets and decided that I may as well support some of the projects directly, and that's something that we'll all dive into today. So quick introductions down the road. It's Peter Darren, founder and CEO of Peak Design. I'm sure a lot of you guys know they're here, it's great. Also co-founder of Climate Neutral. Hana Kajimura from Berts, which is the biggest shoe company that's joined, well, the biggest company that's joined on Climate Neutral. She'll be talking about the business perspective of her journey, she'll see. Agustin Silvani from Quantification International. He's going to talk a bit about what offsets are and how that works. And then Jonathan Cedar from BioLite, primary CEO of BioLite. They've been offsetting their carbon since 2012, and he's also co-founder of Climate Neutral. So, just to dive into it straight away, maybe you guys can start with what is Climate Neutral and how did you guys start it?
Thanks. Hey everybody, just a quick audio check, like how well can you hear me? Sweet, thumbs up, love it. All right. Climate Neutral is an organization. It's a nonprofit organization that seeks to do one thing, and that's be the purveyor of a label, a certification called Certified Climate Neutral. And what that certification means, when you see this logo, it indicates that the brand displaying it has offset the entirety of its carbon footprint, back to every recognizable economic trace of their being in the world. They have done what they can to reduce their footprint, and whatever they can't reduce, they have offset by paying for it, by choosing to pay for their carbon. Point of our organization is to make sure that companies properly measure their carbon footprints and that they buy verified carbon offsets and that they have a reduction plan in place. If they do those three things, they qualify to be certified climate neutral. And personally, I think it's what every single company here at Outdoor Retailer should be doing, but not just in the outdoor industry. This should be pan-industry. This is a good idea and one that is financially achievable. We'll get into more of that soon, I'm sure.
Indeed. I'm like, well, that pretty much sums it up. Let's just get out of here. No, so, Jonathan, could you talk a little bit about BioLite's journey, how you guys have measured your own, footprint, and then why that started Hana Kajimura?
Yeah, sure. So for folks who don't know, BioLite is a personal scale energy company working both to bring clean energy access to smallholder farmers living in remote communities in developing countries, as well as taking those same technologies and making them available to all of us to have, independent energy-enabled adventures off the grid.
Mike, okay. You hear me better now? Okay.
So BioLite's journey with carbon offsets started by the fact that we are incorporated as a social enterprise. So we have a fiduciary obligation to our investors to measure our social, environmental, and financial impacts as a business. And as such, we have been measuring our carbon footprint going back to the first products we shipped. And it was easy for us because we have, you guys hear me?
Yeah, how about now? Better? Way better, okay.
So we've been measuring our carbon footprint going back to the first products we've shipped. And this was easy for us because we had a full-time carbon expert in-house. But what we realized as we were looking at other companies starting this journey is just starting to understand how to measure is very challenging. We also found that the offset market is a very broad and complex marketplace, and so understanding how to select offsets and what offsets are and why they are valid investments in a future that prices carbon is important, also something that a lot of companies were struggling with. And then the third piece is, as BioLite for the last 7 years has been out trying to tell the story of what is carbon neutrality, why does it matter, it's a long and nuanced story to tell to a customer. And so we've been trying to develop these simplified ways of talking to consumers such that they get it. And we realized if everyone's telling a different story, we're trying to re-educate around this times 1,000 brands in this hall. And that's a really challenging place. And so when we put climate neutral together, the goal was, how do we make it dead simple to measure your business, so you're not starting from how do we measure, but rather saying we're going to select this tool because it's an accepted industry standard. How do we connect brands to really credible offsets? And then how do we make it dead simple for them to communicate the value of their climate responsibility to their customers?
So let's take it back one step and let's just talk about what are offsets. So when a company offsets its carbon, what does that actually mean? Where does the money go? What are the actual physical projects that happen? So Agustin, can you talk us through a little bit of what are offsets? Like what actually happens?
Yeah, thanks. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah? All right, so let's take a measure of the audience here. Who flew here? A lot of people. Who offset their flight? Very few people, right? So I think most people know what an offset is in the sense that it's an emissions reduction that you pay for that happens somewhere else. But although the term offset is fairly mainstream, what it is probably isn't. And how you actually do it isn't as well. And if you think about the climate, we have 10 years basically, right? That's what science tells us. We have 10 years to fix the problem, or at least make a big dent. And there's two big ways of doing it. One is you have to reduce the emissions, and that's renewable energy, anything related to reducing the emissions that are going up right now. You have to do that, but that's not enough. You have to sequester the emissions as well. You have to suck out the carbon from the air as well if we're going to meet our target. So if you look at those two things, there's basically different projects that do that. And there's renewable energy projects we're very familiar with. There's things like cook stoves in developing countries. There's planting trees. There's avoiding deforestation. So there are a lot of range of different projects. And what's interesting about them is that they're very specific and unique projects. Basically, offsets are the currency that finance sustainable development in the developing world, right? So there's a cost associated with doing things, not the status quo. It's easier to chop down a forest than to conserve it. This whole thing is set up on retail outdoor, right? In the US, maybe that's not a huge problem, deforestation. In the rest of the world, it is. And it's 1/3 of the total emissions in the world are from deforestation or from natural kind of reasons. So as a CI, we're an international NGO, and we focus a lot on these projects in the developing world. And we're talking about people that live less than $2 a day. So very, very marginalized communities that need a leg up. And so when you buy carbon offsets, you're giving them an opportunity to get a cleaner stove, to get a cleaner source of electricity, to farm coffee the right way instead of chopping down the forest. So all these different things that add up at the end of the day to a ton of carbon, but they're really human impact stories. And I think that's what really we have to get the word out and for people to understand what these things are.
Okay, and so now Hana, can you kind of talk us through all Berts' journey to seeing basically how you guys try to measure your carbon and how you're trying to offset it, and just talk us through the whole journey. And then we'll kind of open it up and all of us will just chit chat about offsets and the whole process in general.
Yeah, so from the brand side, we've been on this journey kind of independently for the last few years and serendipitously got in touch with these guys at just the right time. But as a public benefit corporation, we have always been focused on delivering the lowest carbon product possible, to the extent that we even ended up creating a tool internally that would allow us to calculate the footprint of each of our products and create individual reduction plans for each of our product lines. But the reality is that we're growing really quickly as a company, and as we grow, our carbon footprint grows with us as long as we are making things. And when we stacked up all of the possible levers we have to reduce our footprint, whether it's renewable energy or energy efficiency or using recycled materials, the reality is that didn't get us to zero, and especially not in any sort of near-term timeline. And that's kind of the myth of carbon neutrality to me that I had to come to, is that neutral doesn't mean zero emissions, it means net zero emissions in almost every case, whether it's a brand or a government. And so if we're going to buy offsets in 2030 or 2050, why don't we just buy them now for 100% of our footprint and use that to catalyze additional reductions within our supply chain? So we decided to administer that as a carbon tax internally. So we worked out that for every pair of shoes we make, it costs us about 10 cents to fully account for the carbon embedded in our product and our business, all the way back to the sheep emitting methane on farm, because we use a lot of wool. And as we sell shoes, we put that money into a fund. At the end of the year, we'll look at that fund and use it to fund projects that reduce or sequester more CO2. And for us, this was really about a sense of urgency. As Agustin mentioned, that this problem is far too urgent to not throw everything we can against it and see what sticks. But for us, it can be not an or strategy, not reduce or offset, but reduce and offset. And then we have to use all the tools in our toolbox. And so we made that pledge in April that we're going to be carbon neutral from 2019 forward. We were already planning to calculate all of our emissions and offset all our emissions internally when we heard about climate neutral. And third-party certifications are really important to us. While we were going to do that, we didn't want you guys, our customers, to think we were just doing some sneaky math behind the scenes, and we looked for that third-party certification, but a lot of what was out there was not attainable to us. As a young brand, we can't do full-blown product LCAs every year and pay consultants to account our carbon for us. And we thought climate neutral was a really fit-for-purpose solution that would allow us to kind of get on with the hard work of reducing our emissions.
I'd like to talk about pragmatism for a second. I've been in the outdoor industry for about 10 years now, and I have gone through the process of working with the Higg Index and trying to do that complex LCA that you talk about. And there are an incredible amount of variables involved in that. And for carbon neutrality, it's a bold claim, right? And it's subject, we're obviously going to put ourselves up for scrutiny, saying like, show me the math. And that's a part of this thing. And the math that we're going to show people is that we make reasonable estimates of what carbon footprints are, using greenhouse gas data, the best tactics in the world, but we make reasonable estimates based on the products and the weights of products that people are shipping, and then we round up, just to make sure. And instead of spending all that time and effort and energy and money and blood, sweat, and tears in precisely counting every bean of carbon, we just say that it's probably about here, let's guess here. Or if a company has actually gone through all that blood, sweat, and tears through calculable methods, we will of course accept that method as well. But we are removing the friction to get climate neutral certified. And this is incredibly important. It's incredibly important for brands not just my size, but for the North Face too. They're struggling with this big time to know what their impact is. If someone would grant them the license to say, it's approximately this, and then give them the incentive, customers need to give them the incentive to say, offset the whole thing. This is a big theory of change. This isn't one of those climate change tactics where it sounds like a good idea. This is something where if every business did it, it would make serious impact, like serious impact in fighting climate change. This is a real thing. There are two sources of carbon. There are companies and there are individuals. Individuals have to do their part too, but we can more easily corral the companies of the world and compel them to act, to choose to pay for your carbon. It is not free to remove carbon from the atmosphere. It costs money. As we begin reducing carbon from the atmosphere, the amount of money it costs increases, right? Because we gobble up the low-hanging fruit. We need to do that. We need to see the price of carbon rise. The price of carbon should be precisely the amount of money it takes to take it out of the atmosphere.
So that's actually something that we can all dive into as a panel here. So that's something that historically I found offsets sort of uncompelling, because basically the price of carbon was too low. The project seemed a little bit too light duty, but, you know, and that's a big part of why I started my foundation. I was like, oh, I feel like I can just do the work more directly and not, you know, basically how you price carbon is important. You know, whether it's the social cost of carbon or the actual cost of, what do you call it, extracting carbon versus the cost of emitting carbon. I mean, basically you can account for the cost of carbon in different ways. So let's talk about that a little bit, because actually one of the things I learned from these guys at Climate Neutral was exactly what Peter was just saying, that as you start picking some of those low-hanging fruit projects, as you do some of the projects that are extremely cheap, like low price of carbon, you start to sort of gobble them up, and the price of carbon starts to rise. And I was like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. I mean, that's letting the market sort of dictate the price of carbon. And so, can all you guys talk about that a bit?
Yeah, I can talk about it. I think there's two things, right? There's one that there has to be, whatever the price of carbon is, has to finance that activity on the ground that you're doing. So if it's less than the cost of production, if you want to put it that way, and the project you're financing is not sustainable, obviously. But more than that, at some point the price has to ratchet up to be painful enough to the individual, the company, the whoever, to force that behavior change. Right? If you feel no pain whatsoever, then you're not going to change anything that you're doing. And that doesn't mean you have to feel pain start, right away. Because the big part of the behavior change that we see from big companies like a Disney or a Salesforce to very small companies is just starting to do it. Once you get into the habit of offsetting your footprint, it becomes just a thing that you do. And I think that behavior change is ingrained in companies. The internal carbon tax, you're not going to go backwards from it. It's very hard for companies to say we're going to be less sustainable this year than we were last year. And I think that those are trends that we see coming. And if you think about sort of the social cost of carbon, they say change, happens slowly and then all at once. Look at Europe, what's happening in Europe. It's no longer socially responsible to emit carbon, right? Flights in Europe have gone down 15% because of this flight shaming thing. Rail use has gone up 20%. So this stuff is real and it's happening, and it's your social license to operate. So don't take it lightly, because soon it'll be here, and if you have no experience in offsetting, then you're really going to be behind the curve.
I also think that as a brand, there's a spectrum of how to go about this. There's one way where we just say, okay, our carbon footprint is X thousand tons this year. We go for an RFP to find offsets to buy against that, and kind of do that indiscriminately and just pick the lowest cost projects. There's another way to do this where, as a brand, you can get as direct, as specific, as close to those projects as you want to. You can go visit them. You can make sure that they are doing things that are aligned with your strategy and your supply chain. You can even create offsetting or insetting projects within your supply chain. So it doesn't have to be this either or of either we just buy into this market system and kind of indiscriminately purchase offsets. You can actually do a very tailored and bespoke strategy and make sure that those projects are really charismatic and are going to be stories you want to tell your customers.
One thing I want to add to that, so, Agustin, as you said, we've got about 10 years, right, to avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. And I think one of the reason climate neutral is so exciting to me is it offers an opportunity for all of us to get involved today. I feel like we've all been sitting here saying, when's the government going to regulate on this? This is a government problem. It's too big for us as individual companies. And I don't think that that's true, right? So as we heard this morning in the industry breakfast, the outdoor industry is an $887 billion industry that represents a little under 2% of the US economy, right? And basically all of those decision makers are in this room today, right? So if we, as an industry, could step up, measure our carbon, agree to put a price on it, and speak vocally to our consumers and to our government about our willingness to act, the compatibility of a price on carbon inside of our businesses, the way that our consumers who are voters value this, we as an industry can catalyze this kind of change and really push our government to take the required action to put us on that path to be at an appropriate level of emissions inside of 10 years. And I think that's really the challenge, right? Because otherwise, I feel like we're all sitting here saying, well, someone's got to do something, and this is our window to act. And this is something as an industry we have such an amazing and proud history around, whether it's the preservation of public lands, whether it's the adoption of the Higg Index. This is an industry that's willing to lead with its values and that gets rewarded by its consumers. So it essentially, making it good business for us to lead with our values. And I think that's really the challenge that climate neutral is presenting to everyone here today, is enough sort of waiting for someone else to take the action. This is one recipe that you can take today that's pretty easy.
Okay, so basically, I want to talk about sort of the tension between offsetting and reducing. I mean, both of you guys have talked about businesses offsetting, and ooh, is that it? Oh yeah, limber up, get ready. No, but so I think that a common criticism of offsets is that people just buy their way out of sin. You know, instead of reducing, instead of minimizing the harm that they're doing, they just buy offsets. And so, talk a little bit about how offsets can help lead to greater reductions, or basically the tension between them, or the synergy between them. Let's just open it up to everybody.
I'll take a crack. Reductions are critical. I think that, and not only are they critical, they're obviously the route that we should be pursuing. I just want to make sure that we that everybody pursues them as intelligently as they can. I think Allbirds is a great example of a real reduction. Okay, they're producing an EVA foam right now that has a far smaller carbon footprint. And this is something that will be able to be scaled to other industries because they want it to catch on. It's the equivalent of open sourcing. So this is a technology that my company will probably adopt. Another one is solution dyeing. Okay, it takes way less water to be able to create fabrics and less energy as well. These are obvious decisions that any intelligent business should be pursuing, and they must be pursued. But let us not pretend like we are going to reduce our way out of this problem. This is capitalism, people. We are all here at the epicenter of fun-based capitalism. Okay? Our jobs, most of us, are to grow our businesses. We have population increasing. This shit isn't going down. You can't reduce your way out of this problem. The good news is that when 2050 rolls around, probably all our vehicles will be electric. Our energy is going to come from wind and solar and have storage provided by those electric vehicles, and we'll be a fairly carbon-free economy. The problem is, what do we do in these next 30 years to mitigate that incredibly difficult chunk of carbon while we are still producing fossil fuels? And that is why offsetting, in conjunction with reduction, is the only way we're going to get there for businesses. And the beautiful thing is that they can afford it. It's 1/5 of 1% of Peak Design's revenue to offset the metal and plastic and textiles that we ship around the world. 1/5 of 1%. And that applies to North Face, and that applies to Patagonia, and that applies to anyone in here, approximately. 1/5 of 1%. It is affordable. And that's why companies not only can do this, I think they should do this.
Yeah, it is affordable, and it is one of the most efficient economic decisions around sustainability that we will make as a company. But make no mistake, that does not mean that we're just happy to let that money accumulate and pile up year over year. And though it's 10 cents per pair, we're growing like crazy, and that's going to be real money in no time here. And so whether it's our supply chain team who's been incentivized to ship 100% ocean because they know if they don't, they're going to be accountable for the carbon, the 17 times more carbon that they have from shipping from air. The second thing I would say is that for us at this early stage in our company, it makes a lot of sense because take, for example, renewable energy. We would love to wipe out that portion of our footprint by installing renewables on site. We don't own any of our facilities. We're leasing our headquarters, our distribution centers. We're working with factories where we're a small portion of the product that they make. And by the way, our load is so small these days that we can't sustain that kind of a project, whether it's on-site solar or a virtual purchase agreement of sorts. And so if we can't eliminate that part of our footprint today through direct investment, we're going to need these tools like offsets and renewable energy credits to account for that. But then the last thing I want to say is that I think all of the brands that are founding members of this certification are a new generation of brands. Allbirds is one example. Like, our key differentiator in the market and our promise to our customers is sustainability, and we're not going to use this as an excuse to rest on our laurels. And I think that's on us to prove to all of you guys as we go forward that we're setting actual targets and we're achieving them. But I do think these companies are all ones that where this is an additional strategy. This is one tool in our toolbox. It's not the end all be all.
And think is the reduce or offset is a false dichotomy, really, right? So the atmosphere needs both. You guys are in the business of selling stuff. That's what you do. That's, you know, the retail industry. You have to figure out how to keep doing that, how to sell stuff with less emissions, right? That's your problem. That's not my problem. That's your problem. And as an industry, you have to figure it out, because sooner or later, there's going to be a cap put on you, on your industry. But that's not enough. You can have the whole energy grid be, you know, totally climate neutral. You can have Elon make something amazing, and we're still screwed, right? We still need the other parts. We still need the natural kingdom out there, the forest. What are trees? Trees are carbon. If we don't figure out where we get our food from, you know, where we, I don't know, how we build our cities, everything, it's all related. So you need to offset in the sense that you need to start reducing emissions elsewhere other than just your supply chain. But you also, as a company, need to be credible. And we don't work with companies that don't take any emission reduction measures themselves. So if you're not changing anything that you do, to us, that's not credible. You might be buying time. And if you look at a sector like aviation, how are they going to reduce emissions? It's very difficult right now. You need some big technological change. So for them, offsets are a way of buying time till we figure it out. And it's a time-limited sort of time, right? So we have 5 years or so until aviation gets its act together. And I think offsets have a very real role to play. But if you're not doing anything, to us, it's not credible.
I guess I just want to add one thing to that, which is I think a key value of climate neutral is quantification, right? We're all out here telling charismatic stories as brands, and a lot of us are telling charismatic stories about sustainability, but very few of us are measuring and publicly disclosing the quantitative impacts of that work, right? And I think the real risk there is it becomes hard to distinguish between work that is truly effective and work that's just a good story, right? And so one of the primary things we ask for climate neutral companies is that you disclose your carbon footprint, right? And so if your company, even let's say you're not ready to go full offset today, which obviously we think you should be, if you are focused on reductions, we would challenge you to publish the quantitative impacts of those reductions, right? Just offsetting the electricity in your office is not enough. For BioLite, 90% of our footprint is in our raw materials, our materials processing, and our product shipping, right? It's not in our corporate travel, it's not in the electricity of our offices. And we publish a report every year that says, here's where our carbon came from, here are the initiatives we're taking to reduce it, and we've also chosen to offset everything we can. But I would just say that I think this is a crucial step for separating, you know, true impact work from lip service. And so I would really challenge everyone to put this back to a quantitative level, not just qualitative storytelling.
Yes. A couple questions for the audience, almost simple polls. Well, one of the things that Jonathan and I and the rest of the team at Climate Neutral talk about is that there just isn't common understanding about carbon. How many people think they know approximately how much carbon goes into manufacturing and delivering an automobile? Approximately. Who would say, who would feel confident that they know that number? Yeah, it's on our website. I mean, it's up front. It's, well, I think this is the point though. We have no idea. It's about 10 tons. Okay, it's on that order of magnitude. For one of our backpacks, it's about 200 pounds worth of carbon. And another thing is, does anyone know how much it costs to offset a ton of carbon? How many people think they know an average price to offset a ton of carbon? Oh, well that's because you work for Bonneville Environmental Foundation. Another one right there, that's great. So 3 of you. Is that okay? Is that okay that only 3? This is an educated group of people who are environmentally conscientious, and we don't know how much carbon goes into products, and we don't know how much it costs to reduce it. That was the case for me before I got into offsetting our whole footprint. I, on a lark in 2017, I wonder how much carbon Peak Design is responsible for now that we're shipping 300 containers full of plastic, metal, and fabric around the world. I bet it's an unbelievable amount, and I bet there's no way we could pay for it. We measured it quite liberally at about 20,000 tons, and the average price was $3 a ton. So for $60,000, we made $30 million worth of revenue of shipping stuff around the world, be carbon net zero, carbon neutralized. And that is really that's what started this whole thing. It was essentially this realization that, holy shit, this is achievable. How come everybody isn't doing this as the low bar for responsibility. Not that come exalt us on high, we're amazing, look what we did. This should be the low bar for all companies. We need a new mindset. And we need a new understanding about what this costs.
But to be fair, that's partially because the price of carbon is so low. I mean, in theory, the price of carbon wouldn't stay at $3, right?
There's a wonderful graph called the marginal cost of abatement, put out by McKinsey. What it does is it shows how many tons of reduction are available at what price. We are a hell of a long ways away from a $10 price of carbon. We should be able to do somewhere between 10 and 15 billion tons of reduction for under $10 per ton. That's really meaningful. The terms to explain that, like, that's 1/5 of the entire world's carbon footprint. It's less than $10 a ton. Let's go get this low-hanging fruit, because last year the whole world bought 50 million carbon offsets. 50 million, when we got 10 billion hanging out there at $10 a ton. We need demand, and we need the customers and the people who work for companies in here to go back to your CEOs and your heads of sustainability and say, gosh, we maybe should be offsetting our whole footprint.
Actually, so I'm just curious, how many of you guys actually work for brands who this is relevant for, and how many of you guys are here to stroll around and score all the free swag and steal snacks and things? Just because, okay, so you actually work for a brand, or you're here to steal swag? Okay. Yeah, I was just curious because I'm used to hanging out in the whole climbing exam of the show, which is mostly just people here to steal free snacks and hope to get free product. But it seems like most of you guys are actually in business, which is great. Thanks for making all the things that we steal here at the show.
Hey, you're a business too, pal. You can offset your footprint.
Yeah, well, I mean, actually, I kind of do through the foundation.
Good man. Let's get you certified.
Yeah. No, I mean, well, honestly, that's a big part of why I started the Hana Foundation, was because, you know, basically all the math for emissions was slightly opaque to me. I mean, I did some rough back of the envelope math for my own personal footprint from going on expeditions and things like that. It wasn't totally clear. I wasn't totally sure how to offset it. And then ultimately, I realized that the money that I was going to give to an offsetting program was all going to support specific projects somewhere else. And so I decided I may as well just support those projects directly. And then after 5 or 6 years of that, now the Hana Foundation specifically supports solar projects around the world. But I mean, that's basically, you know, it's also, you know, we've all sort of gone on the same journey to some extent, trying to figure out how to minimize our own personal footprints and then finding the best way to do it. And then, you know, but I personally have never been that worried about the math behind it, the quantitative analysis, because basically I do enough to know that I'm positive. You know, I mean, I fly a lot because of climbing, because of travel, but not so much that, you know, basically the amount of solar that we're spreading around the world more than offsets that. And I sleep great at night. You know, that's good enough for me. But I think that for a business, there's definitely a place for quantitative analysis.
Yeah, I think as a business, as a young company, as a venture-backed startup, if we don't have numbers to put behind the sustainability work we're doing, it's harder for us to make the case. And yes, we're a public benefit corporation, and that certainly goes a long way to legally allowing us to invest in things that don't just return value to our shareholders. But when we're making decisions at the board level, at the VP level, we need to have just as much rigor and quantitative data behind our sustainability decisions and impact as the finance team does, or the product or supply chain or materials team does.
Yeah, and again, I think this world is coming, right? This carbon-constrained world is coming. So you have to position yourself as you're a company to be able to do it. And as has been said many times in this panel, there's no excuse not to do it. Your company probably spends more on coffee than on what the offsets would cost, right? And especially some of these big companies. And that's a fact, I mean, trust me. So these are not huge expenditures that we're talking about. And the technology is there. The app that's being produced, this stuff is doable. So there's really no excuse. You don't need permission. You don't need the government to tell you to do it. So it's up to you and your companies and your customers, and then kind of get the ball rolling.
I think, as we've alluded to a few times, that not all offsets are created equal. There are less good offsets and more good offsets, and the good news is there's a heck of a lot of tools and organizations out there that want to help you find the best ones that make the most sense for your brand. I think at the very basic level, there's guidelines like these guys are putting in place around kind of the year of the offset as well as the standard third-party certification that it is certified and registered to. But there are also partners out there that will help connect you and do extra due diligence on these projects to make sure that they fit your specific guidelines and strategies as a brand. And you can get those offsets just as economically as any others.
One quick thing, Alex, on the bean counting that you talked about. I want to illustrate a kind of a problem that exists in today's world, which is one of the things that climate neutral is going to solve, and that's unified accounting, both simplified and unified. In 2017, the year that we measured our footprint, we came up with 20,000 tons. Patagonia also measured their footprint. They found themselves responsible for 140,000 tons of carbon. We found our responsible for 20,000. So 7 times as much for Patagonia. But Patagonia did 35 times as much revenue as Peak Design did. Our manufacturing processes aren't that different. Certainly Patagonia has led the way on best practices in manufacturing, but they are not 5 times more carbon efficient than we are. And that represents the fact that there is no unified standard of measurement for carbon. It's one of the services we hope to provide operationally with Climate Neutral. I think it's worth supporting.
Okay, I want to open it up to questions from the audience for a minute. But so, because you guys don't have mics, will you yell and I'll repeat the question and the answer? And it's too annoying to pass the mic. I mean, look how far the crowd gets back. But so, and honestly, any critical questions, any probing questions, we're all up here on the panel, we're all sort of on the same page that we agree that we should offset our impact and minimize, basically we all agree that this is a good idea. Does anyone think it's a bad idea? Or does anyone think that it's not the right execution, or do you think they have a better way? Let's hear about it, if anyone. Not to put you on the spot, but I'm sure there must be somebody out there that's
If
like,
you don't ask questions, it's like me, I'm just going to keep talking. That'll be annoying.
Yeah, hit us.
You guys are a new organization. What do you need? Are you hiring? Are you fundraising rather than additional brands coming in? What do you guys as an organization need right now?
Right on the money, man. We're hiring. Sorry, the question was, what do we need as an organization? What actions can you guys take out there? Are we hiring? Are we fundraising? Are we trying to get brands to join our organization? Are we trying to develop more important relationships with groups like Conservation International? Absolutely, all of the above. This is a national organization. You guys are perhaps unaware of this. This is our launch day. This is our industry launch day, okay? This is the day, this is the event. There it is. You're here for it. You help make it happen. Alex, you help make it happen. But they don't put me and Jonathan on the cover of this magazine. They put me, Jonathan, and you on the cover of this magazine. And we're pretty well aware of that. So thank you for lending your services.
Just a handsome face.
I would just add to that. I think what I would ask is that every brand in this hall comes and visits us at the Climate Neutral booth. Climate Neutral is an independent nonprofit. It will be governed by its membership. This is not a BioLite or Peak Design initiative. This is just something we believe should exist in the world, and we want to turn over to the public good. And so, I think the biggest thing we need is membership, right? We want to stand up that $887 billion example to the world of why this industry cares, and then we want to take that example and help other industries feel like it's a safe thing to do to show that they care. And so come visit us, even if you're not ready to sign up.
Where's the booth?
Oh, the booth.
36119.
And it's on the map, so you guys will find it.
Upper level 36119.
But come visit us. There is no cost to becoming climate neutral other than the cost of measuring your footprint and choosing your offsets, right? There's no membership fee. The license for the mark is free. Our advice is free, right? Come ask us questions about things you don't understand in your carbon footprint, and let us help unpack that journey for you, so that if you're not ready to do it today, you can help set that plan inside your organization to be ready to do it in a couple of years. And so I think that's the bare minimum ask here, is that you guys engage with us in this conversation so that we are positioned to stand up this really big, proud example that I feel like we can all be a part of.
And also, to be quite specific, what we are doing is we are growing what we call the freshman class. And so we're asking companies to sign a memorandum of understanding, which says between January 1 of 2020 and April 21st, you will go through the efforts to measure your footprint. We will help. Reduce what you can. Purchase those offsets for anything you can't reduce. and then label your products. So that's what we're doing. All you got to do today is sign the paper. The legwork is going to come in the new year, but we want to roll into this summer, likely with a Kickstarter campaign, because that's something Jonathan and I know pretty well, as does all Berts. That it's going to help kind of bring this to a broader base of consumers, and then we intend to have a huge splash at Climate Week in New York City with a lot more partners, some of which we can't exactly announce at this point, but we intend to be highly relevant. For this thing to work, we need to have wide appeal.
Yeah, question. Yeah, so the question is, have you guys thought about setting a price on carbon? Because right now the price seems too low. Has Climate Neutral thought about setting its own price on carbon?
So two things with respect to that. First off, the social cost of carbon, let's assume it's $50 for emitting a ton of carbon. That also means that the social benefit for sequestering a ton of carbon is $50. Do you agree with that equivalency? I mean, the whole concept is carbon balance and carbon accounting, right? And I believe in the social cost of carbon, but there's also a social benefit to reducing carbon, which is important. And with respect to the cost of the offset, offsets are priced based upon how much it costs to create the offsetting technology. For example, Peak Design proudly covered a landfill in South Carolina with a tarp and collected methane gas. That's a pretty cheap offset to buy because it's not that expensive to cover it with HDPE tarp and push dirt over the top and collect the gas. And it's a very quantifiable amount of methane that you're preventing from going into the air. So I think for this system, I mean, not I, this doesn't matter. Economists believe that for this to be a market-driven economy, it has to do with the cost of actually reducing the carbon. We will see that rise as the low-hanging fruit gets gobbled up, but we should not be arbitrarily setting a price. The market should set it.
With that said, I think one thing that we can provide as climate neutral is clear visibility to where that price is moving over time, so that companies can model this into their businesses in a business compatible way, right? So today we're asking people to model around $5. The truth is that tons are a little bit less expensive than that, so I think that's a conservative figure. But part of the value that we can provide as a huge demand aggregator is to really have visibility into, how quickly are we scooping up these low-hanging tons, what will the next tons cost, and really help businesses plan for the evolving price of carbon.
Yeah, actually, so I just want to tell a random little anecdote. So I had breakfast with Peter a couple weeks ago, and we were talking about this, and he told me this whole story of Peak Design covering a landfill, and that's how they reduce their emissions. And I actually pushed back on it pretty hard, because I was like, that is an extremely uncompelling example. I was like, the landfill, that should be regulated. The municipality should be forcing them to do it. The business should be doing it. Basically, there should be rules in place. It shouldn't be Peak Design's place to help some random landfill, which is presumably a for-profit company. They're charging their consumers to haul their trash, and then they're not covering their own landfill. I'm like, that's BS. Why is Peak Design doing that? What a waste of carbon offsets. And that's traditionally been one of my views towards carbon offsets. But the thing that, after a long conversation about it, I kind of realized that is the low-hanging fruit of carbon offsets. And the reality is that the municipality isn't forcing them to do it. There isn't any regulatory thing in place. And then rather than sitting around complaining that there's nobody regulating it, you may as well just put the cover on it and move forward. And that's kind of the thing, is that the price of carbon is super low right now, but once you start covering a bunch of these landfills, you're like, there's a finite number of landfills, you run out of cheap projects like that, and you start getting into the more significant projects that actually have they start to do work that I think is more significant in the world, which is, some of the projects that I've been supporting through my foundation, things like that, supporting energy access abroad. And so basically, a landfill might not be that sexy of a project. You're like, that's lame, they should be doing it themselves. But the reality is they're not doing it themselves, and you may as well just get it done and just keep moving forward. That's kind of the decision that I came to. But
yeah, I think that's sort of hobbled the climate change movement in general, is a search for perfection, right? So our house is burning, right? And we need good enough. What's a good enough bucket? What's a good enough kind of water? We can figure out perfect a little bit later on, but right now let's scoop up as much of this stuff as possible. Let's at least gain some time so we can figure some of these things out. And I agree with you 100%. The carbon price needs to be higher. But just like anything else, it's going to be a spectrum. And there's going to be some companies that go after sort of high quality, not high quality, but let's say something you can put on the front page of your CSR report, right? That you're proud of, that carbon is just one component, but it's really the human story, or you're helping conserve tiger habitat, whatever it may be, that's really compelling. Some companies like that, some companies not. So I think we need a spectrum for the market to flourish. We need it to be a market rather than a niche little thing that only a few companies can afford.
And from the brand perspective, when we set about on this journey and started looking at offsets, the first thing we said is, like, we want it to be additional, we want it to be permanent, we want the standard things, we want it certified to a third party, and the range of projects we get back is like between 50 cents and $25 or more. Like, it's a wide range. Then we say, okay, we want to apply all these other very specific brand lenses around geography, where we're sourcing from, and relationship to our supply chain. We still have a range of like $3 to $30. And so it's on us as a brand then, and I think the idea of establishing a carbon price is interesting, to establish our own carbon price and say we're going to pick a number that is high enough that gives us flexibility to invest in these projects that are really specific and charismatic, related to our supply chain around New Zealand wool and things like that, but we also have other parts of our footprint that we want to take care of in the most economic way possible to make this achievable for the business to be 100% of our emissions all the way back to the on-farm impact. And so I think it's ultimately, without any sort of guidance from the government, we all do have to set our own carbon price, and hopefully that's a portfolio price that makes all parts of this landscape attainable.
I just want to add one really quick thing to that, which is just to reiterate, because I think our goal here is to make these decisions easy, and that's a big piece of why we created Climate Neutral. This is a complex topic of offsets, and we know that that's been a barrier to adoption, and our job as a nonprofit is to help you guys do this, right? So you can just simply buy into a fractional share of our portfolio and call it a day. You don't necessarily, it's great if you have the resource to really deeply know this work in the way that, you know, Hana and the Berts team do, but if that's not where your company is yet, we can help make this dead simple for you.
I'm proud of the landfill.
Maybe one more question over here, and then some concluding remarks, and then let's get on with the show. So here, one more question.
So the price is unbelievably cheap right now to me, like realizing that. You talk about the low-hanging fruit being consumed, and so it's a brand that's thinking about coming in 2 years from now, and this catches on, all the low-hanging fruit's gone, prices have gone up a ton, and all of a sudden it's a lot more expensive for me. What do you expect the market to do long-term with?
So the question is basically, what do you expect the market to do long term? He's talking about the price is super low right now, but if the brand can't get into the carbon market for a couple years and the low-hanging fruit gets gobbled up, what happens then?
So that was kind of what I alluded to earlier with respect to the marginal cost of abatement curve. At about 10 billion tons of reduction is when it costs $10. $10 per ton is still affordable right now. Most people are paying $3 to $5. 10 is entirely reasonable. That curve was put out quite a few years ago. Technology has advanced considerably. It is very reasonable to expect that the even higher priced offsets will come down in price, right? We've got technological innovation driving down the price of carbon reduction, and hopefully, if we all do this right, we've got demand that's going to be driving up the price of this thing. So it's going to be really interesting to see where they mesh. And I want to leave you with one thing. Let's say for a second that they mesh at $20 a ton. Let's say that like all carbon reduction, all 50 gigatons of planetary carbon reduction could be done at $20 a ton. I'm not saying it can be right now, but I'm saying at a future state, if this thing works. That costs $1 trillion annually. You have to keep doing the offsets. Global world product is $87 trillion. Can we really not afford one of those trillions to go to carbon reduction? If climate is as existential as we all think it is, I think that is affordable. Climate change is seen as this problem that we can't do anything about, but in actuality, we have to pay for it to be fixed as a society. Governments ought to make us do it. They're not. Businesses, step up. Do it.
I think with that, let's call it a show. Let's all party. I think we'll all be hanging out and take questions, chat off stage. But thank you guys so much for listening, and hope you guys check out the Hana Neutral booth. Cheers.